Any business, regardless of its purpose or its motivations, must somehow make and manage money. For more traditional businesses, money is really the core concept and the core concern, and it should not be considered a negative thing. Money is simply one of those common factors that every business must, in one way or another, be a little more than mildly concerned about. So let's get down to discussing how you can manage money with Excel for your business. What you need to know is how to create budgets, how to visualize data values, how to consolidate data, how to track and analyze loans. You also need to know how to keep account registers. Making money comes from two different perspectives: money coming in, or income, and money going out, or expenses. We'll be discussing how to analyze that balance in another chapter. At the moment, what we know is that individuals, families, governments, and businesses alike all need to know and understand what they need money for. That is the purpose of a budget. Budgets allow you to summarize probable income and expenses for a given period of time. They provide a concrete, organized, and easily understood breakdown of how much money is needed. Budgets really are requisite in order to make good business decisions, no matter how much or how little money you may have. Budgets and worksheets are very organized, but budgets with many items can still be confusing and difficult to draw conclusions from. Being able to visualize values enhances understanding by allowing you to more easily compare costs and identify waste or areas of concern. Visual representations of data also help you communicate the significance of that data with others. Depending on how you create budgets and other information in Excel, it may become necessary and useful to consolidate data from different worksheets. This can be to summarize it or to just get all the information together in one place. Most budget expenditures require cash to pay for them. The cash reserves of some companies is larger than the entire budgets for some small countries. Regardless of the availability of cash, most businesses at some point in time choose to take out a loan. It may be because they don't have enough liquid capital or cash to make a purchase, or it may be because a business decision has been made to retain cash and use funds from a loan instead. On kind of the negative side, it may be because there's not enough cash to pay bills, but we'll try to stay away from that. A critical skill in business and in life is to understand the true cost of credit, including what the loan will eventually cost, not just the amount of money that was borrowed. This not only is necessary to help budget for each required payment, but also knowing the true total cost of the loan over time. It's only with this information that sound business decisions requiring loans and the options involved with them can be accurately assessed. Whether you are tracking the balance due on a loan, as payments are made but interest is also accruing, or you are simply trying to keep track of money available in a bank account, or possibly it's monies owed to you by customers who have accounts, the ability to keep accurate account registers is also important. While most basic types of account registers would simply keep a running total, in business, additional information is also usually necessary, especially when it comes to analyzing income and expenses for things like preparing taxes. In short, nothing about budgeting and account registers and money in general matters unless you can also ensure that the data entered is valid. You need to build into worksheets methods to ensure valid data entry, not only to prevent typographical errors, but also to draw attention to certain values that are not in acceptable ranges. Ensuring this type of valid data is really critical to everything we do in Excel, but can be especially important in business, as the numbers we enter can filter out to so many different areas and have far-reaching effects. These skills will allow you to more accurately and easily plan for and track where money is going, the cost and status of monies that need to be borrowed, as well as the current status of money sources such as bank accounts. We'll make talking about money more engaging by using Excel tools like worksheet grouping, relative and absolute referencing, financial functions, data validation, subtotals, sparklines, charts, data consolidation, and even the sharing of workbooks. Because money and cash flow are so intertwined with virtually every aspect of business, it's difficult to create a short list of business topics we'll touch on, but specifically, we'll be highlighting things like bookkeeping, budgeting, business planning, cash flow, communication, debt analysis, financial analysis, and the ability to put into place internal controls. At a higher level, All of these topics relate to how well different aspects of the business can be analyzed and managed, including production of some higher level output like financial statements that will be discussed in a different chapter. While the decisions you actually make are often subjective and have other variables to consider, utilizing Excel can provide a basis for sound business decisions and activity when it comes to managing money for your business. Although I don't really recommend it, technically it's possible that you could live your personal life without ever having a budget. Even though many people don't formally create household budgets, at some level there has to be an idea in your head about how you're going to spend your money, or perhaps more accurately, what you will need to spend your money on, which will then tell you if and how much money you have to spend on those other leftover things. If you don't, I can pretty much assure you that at some time it's all going to come crashing down on you in a very bad way. That's just a little bit of personal advice. In business, budgets are not usually considered optional. They are required in order to plan cash flow and have the ability to meet financial obligations. In larger organizations, budgets are usually done by smaller parts of the organization so that the organization as a whole knows how it needs to function and function in an effective way, not the least of which is managing income, expenses, and cash flow. Budgets usually contain expense categories. If you're interested in being sure that you have enough money to pay for those expenses, then they'll contain income as well, but some do just address expenses. They then have individual items within those categories that need to be considered. Budgets are usually broken down into monthly expenses, but for some businesses, this may be done for quarterly or annual expenses as well. Budgets usually have one or more totals to help summarize the data for an overall picture of the cash requirements. Now, budgets can be formatted and arranged in a variety of ways in Excel. What often occurs is that they are spread over multiple worksheets, either being separated by location or maybe month or perhaps income and expense categories themselves. This creates the need to be able to not only work easily with multiple worksheets, but also to be able to summarize that information in order to simplify it. Flexibility for everyone in an organization who may need to use them is important. In the Budgets Workbook file, we have 4 individual worksheets, one for each office location of our company. If we look at the bottom of the screen, we can see Boise, Boston, Denver, and Seattle. Each of these worksheets includes standard expense items as corporate wants to see them. That's for consistency's sake. There's also a budget category and values for each month of the given year. Each budget for each location is formatted exactly the same way. The very first worksheet is actually a summary worksheet, and it's not quite finished yet. It requires a lot of calculations that will be done after we work with the individual locations. We need to put some finishing touches on the individual worksheets as well as create the summary calculations. We also want to create some visual representations to make it easier to understand at a glance, as well as to be able to share the overall budget picture with our management team. As we start to review our worksheets, we notice that Boise looks okay, but when we get to Boston, we notice that it looks like there's some empty values. In fact, there are 2 different things that catch our eye. One is that there are no values for the sewer expense, and also that there is nothing for the internet expense. We actually understand why this is. Not all of our offices have all of the expenses. Remember that corporate has dictated what they need to put into their budget for consistency's sake. But in this case, for example, Boston does not have a separate sewer expense. It's included with their rent or their lease payment. What we know that we want to do, though, is make sure that no one else gets confused by this. That if a value is actually 0, like it is for sewer, that it actually shows up NA for not applicable, as opposed to the values like internet, which are just empty. It's often important to differentiate between the two. So we're going to start by grouping the worksheets together. To do that, we're going to move back to our very first location, which is the Boise worksheet. Hold the Shift key on the keyboard and click on the last worksheet, which is Seattle. They all appear lit up and are bolded. Now anything that we do on one worksheet applies to all of the others. Now it's simply a matter of formatting our cells. We'll start by selecting all of the values. That means we're going to start with cell C5 and bring it all the way down to the very bottom, which includes cell N13. Now we can bring up the Format Cells dialog in a variety of ways. I'm simply going to right-click. We'll choose Format Cells, and we'll go to the Custom category if it's not already selected. Custom categories actually have 4 different possible areas: positive numbers, negative numbers, zero values, and text. Each of these sections is separated by a semicolon. We're interested in formatting the zero values. Now, if we wanted to, we could simplify this by also taking out text values. But if we wanted to leave that in, we simply need to move before the last semicolon and delete what's currently here, back to the next semicolon. Then we need to enter the value that we want, which happens to be a text entry. When we're working with custom formats, anything we want to appear as static or hard-coded text needs to go into double quotation marks. We'll type in NA for not applicable, close out that double quote, and then come down to the bottom of the window and simply click or tap OK. Now remember, Boise, which is the currently active sheet, doesn't have any of these zero values. And we don't want to take a look at Boston quite yet until we do 1 or 2 more things based on our grouping. The next thing that we know that's going to apply to all of our worksheets is the fact that our company has entered into a national contract for internet services. While each individual location will be paying its own bill, the cost is going to be the same across the board, and that's $248. So by simply clicking in cell C10, which is the January cost for internet on the Boise sheet, and entering our value of $248, we can then take that value, move to the lower right-hand corner, get the little black plus sign, and drag it across, which is going to fill the value all the way across from January through December without having to type it over again. The last thing we're going to do using our grouped worksheets is pretty much the same thing, except this time we're going to create a calculation. If we move over to cell O4, this is going to be the total annual cost. We need to create a sum function that adds up all of the values from column C all the way through to column N. We'll create the simple sum function, and then I'm going to click and drag, but we could also type the cell references as well. There's the start of the function, along with the opening parenthesis, and now I'm simply going to click and drag across the cells I want to use. As I said, it certainly is okay if you prefer to type these values as well. Once it's finished, all we have to do is press Enter. We'll use that fill handle one more time, which is on the lower right-hand corner of the cell. With the little black plus sign, we don't have to drag though because we want to fill down this entire column. And here's a little trick for you. Let me move this cell selection out of the way. When you have the plus sign and you want to fill a column, by simply double-clicking, it will automatically fill those values all the way to the end of the data. Now this is fairly short data, but especially when things don't fit on one screen, that can save you a lot of scrolling. Now, we finished our work with the grouped worksheets, so I strongly recommend that we go back down to the bottom, right-click on any one of those grouped sheets, and choose Ungroup Sheets. This way, we make sure that we don't inadvertently make changes to all of the worksheets from this point forward. Notice that when we move to the Boston worksheet, that we now see NA for our sewer utilities, and also for the lawn, and for maintenance on the months that don't have any maintenance fees. We can see similar types of things for Seattle that doesn't pay for water. In this video, we worked with individual worksheets as a group in order to ensure that we are consistent and optimize our efforts. We also created a custom format and used the fill handle to quickly apply both values and to copy calculations. In part 1 of this topic, we grouped worksheets while we created a custom format and applied some consistent values and calculations. In this part, we'll work with consolidating data by creating 3-dimensional formulas and actually work with the Consolidate Data option. We'll also talk about creating subtotals, all on our summary sheet. Let's get to work on our summary sheet. Summary sheet should be the first worksheet in the workbook. And right now it's a little bit boring because it has lots of labels, but no actual data. The purpose of the summary sheet, of course, is to take the individual costs from each individual office location and be able to see them in one single place, which will represent the overall expenses for our company. The hard way would be to create 108 individual calculations. The easy way is to create something called a consolidation. There are 3 basic ways to perform consolidation in Excel. The one that has been around for the longest period of time, as a matter of fact, since Excel first began, and uses a standard function to pull values, is the one that we're going to start with here. It's called a 3-dimensional formula. What really makes it different from the other 2 consolidation methods is that we create it manually. So let's go ahead and get started. We need to select cell C5 on our consolidation or summary worksheet. which is the January expense for rent or lease. As with any other type of calculation, we start with the equal sign, followed by the name of the function, which in this case is sum because all we want to do is add up the values. Once we type that opening parenthesis, that's when things get different. We need to first tell Excel which worksheets to pull the data from, and then which cell from each of those worksheets to use. We can do this because all of our worksheets are formatted exactly the same way. So let's get the first part done first. We want to select Boise through Seattle. So just like grouping the worksheets, we're going to group them here by clicking on Boise, holding the Shift key, and then clicking on Seattle. Now don't try to go back to any of the other worksheets. That will mess up your function. Instead, simply click or drag over the cell or range of cells that you want to include in the function. In this case, it's just a single cell. So we're going to go back and click on exactly the same cell as we started with, which is cell C5 for the January rent. Once you're finished selecting all of the cells or ranges, simply press Enter. That will take you back to the very first place where you started, which in this case is our summary sheet. Now it's simply a matter of selecting that fabulous calculation and filling it where we need it to go. I'm going to go down first and across second. And now, literally in just a few seconds, we have a method of calculating exactly what our rent cost is for January from all of our locations, not just from one of them, and the same for all of our other values and months as well. Of course, if any of the values in the individual location budgets has changed, then the summary will automatically update based on this formula. So we really are getting a 2-for-1 and will allow others to be able to work with their budgets without having to worry about taking the second step to update the summary as well. Now, the second and more recent addition to Excel that is used to perform consolidations is actually to use the consolidation tool. This is basically going to do what we just did. It's going to do it in a little more automated way, but then again, in some ways it's harder. So it's not that either one is right or wrong. It just depends on how your data is organized and how you prefer to work. Before we get too carried away, though, I do notice that in cell A15 we have a title called Average Costs, but it doesn't look too much like a title. So we're going to format that real quick using a cell style. We'll activate the Home tab, move over to the Styles group, and display the drop-down for the Cell Styles option. Here there are a variety of predefined styles. You'll notice that one has already been pre-configured called Column Heading. This is one that's already been applied to this worksheet, and so it keeps consistency. Now we can go ahead and click in cell A17, which is where we want our consolidation range that we're about to create to be created. Where exactly do we find this consolidation option? Well, because it deals with data, we're going to find it underneath the Data tab. Once that's activated, we can move over to the Data Tools group and click or tap Consolidate. This should display the Consolidate window where we can structure how we want our data consolidated. First of all, we have to identify the function. We already did a sum function, so this time we're going to use the average so we can see the average costs for each of these months and line items. Now it needs to know what our reference range should be, and we actually need to add each worksheet one at a time. We'll click in the reference field and then click to roll it up. Now we're going to start with Boise. We simply want to select everything, including the labels. Once we get that selection made, we'll roll down our window and we'll click Add to add that to our references and then move on to the next worksheet. I'm going to repeat the process 3 more times for Boston, Denver, and Seattle, but I won't make you sit through it. So we'll come back as soon as those have been added in. I've just finished adding in the Seattle worksheet, and we can see all 4 of our locations have been added. Now it's just a matter of going through a few checkboxes at the bottom. If we want our consolidation data to use labels, we need to designate where those labels are. In our case, it's the top row and the left column. Lastly, we can choose to actually link to the source data, so that if the source data is updated, our consolidation sheet will update as well. With that, it's simply a matter of clicking or tapping OK. And there you have it. Now, I'm not sure that was any faster than the 3-dimensional formula we did. It's just another option. And where it works better, as a matter of fact, where it works where 3-dimensional formulas won't, is if all of the worksheets do not have the data in the same location. Now, they still have to be arranged in the same way, but maybe in one worksheet they started on the 5th row for some reason. In that case, the consolidation would work better simply because we get to add each of our worksheets or each of our ranges individually. If we look over on the left-hand side, we'll now see a series of plus signs, just like you can expand and collapse folders in Windows Explorer. Consolidation is kind of a catch-all. It gives us a way to easily summarize from multiple different areas, ranges, or worksheets within the same workbook or even from completely different files. But in some ways, it's also like subtotals. Now, we won't go into all of the technical differences between them and the similarities, but this is the type of thing that we see with subtotals. First of all, we can click on any one of the plus signs to expand and see the detail that's going into the summary calculation. Likewise, we can also click on the minus sign to collapse it back down, which is the way it's initially presented. At the top left of the screen, just below the name box, we also see some numbers. This is another way to more generally expand and collapse the data. If we click on larger numbers, it expands it all the way out, all of the levels, instead of doing them one at a time. And if we click or tap on the number 1, it collapses them all back down. The same type of thing could be created using subtotals, as well as pivot tables and a few other techniques. If you're interested in using subtotals specifically, don't forget that they are found on the Data tab, on the far right-hand side of the ribbon underneath the Outline group. When we click subtotals, it's going to give us an error because we already have something in Excel and it's getting it a little confused. So we'll simply say OK. But the reason I wanted to open this window is to show you that the options are very similar. When we consolidated, we chose a summary function and then designated the ranges to consolidate. With subtotals, you're working with a single range of data that's been sorted. You can then select which field is going to change. In this case, it might be category. Then you can choose the function and then choose one or more columns for which you want to summarize using this particular function. You would then simply click OK, and it would apply the same type of formatting that we see with the consolidation range. So there are two different features of Excel that both allow us to summarize data, as well as giving us the opportunity to expand and collapse so that we can view it in different levels of detail depending on our needs. If we think back, we actually used a couple of different techniques here. We did three-dimensional formulas at the top of our worksheet to summarize information from the same cells on multiple worksheets into our summary sheet. We then created a consolidation using the consolidation feature, and we talked about subtotals even though we didn't actually apply them. The result is basically the same for all of these. They're ways of summarizing data quickly and easily. That rounds out the topics for this video, and in part 3 of this particular topic, we're going to take on putting this data into a visual format, primarily using sparklines and charts. In the first 2 parts of this topic, we work with some tools that will help us work better with budgets that can be a little large and cumbersome. We worked with grouping worksheets so that we could create things and apply them like custom formats and calculations, but only have to apply them once instead of time and time and time again. We then took some time to consolidate data. We did so in kind of the old-fashioned but still relevant way of creating three-dimensional formulas. We also used the consolidation tool, and we discussed subtotals and how all of these allow us to consolidate data from multiple places and see them more easily in something like a summary sheet. In this last part, we want to address how to add visual representations of our data to our budgets, and we're going to start with sparklines. We know that in general it's faster and easier for people to understand numbers when they are represented visually. So we're going to work first with sparklines, which are one of the most recent additions to the charting features in Excel. They're just little mini charts that are placed inside of individual cells and can represent row and column values in a very visual way. Now, I've done a little bit of work with this worksheet since we finished our last topic. Primarily, I shrunk down a couple of the columns to make things fit better. I want to make sure, though, that we don't lose our labels on the left-hand side as we scroll further to the right. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of column D, and then move to the View tab. And from the Freeze Panes option, we're going to choose to freeze the panes. This allows us to now scroll to the right without losing those labels. Why is that important? Because the very last column that we currently have for our data is column P, and that's where we have totaled all of the rows to give us an annual cost for each of our line items. If we move over to the right, normally our labels would have kind of dribbled over onto the left-hand edge and we wouldn't be able to see them, but now we can because of freezing the panes. We're going to go ahead and create a sparkline. Now we actually want to create our first sparkline for the very top row of our data, which is row 4, our monthly totals. By selecting the cell, and then moving to the Insert tab, and then looking about half or two-thirds of the way over, we see an entire grouping for sparklines. There are 3 types of sparklines: lines, columns, and win-loss. We're going to choose the column type. This displays the Create Sparklines window, which actually is very simple. All it needs to know is what range of data we want to use for our sparkline. We'll roll this up, and we'll select all of the values from December back to January. Now, we do not want to include the values in column P because that's a total of what we already have, and it would make our chart look a little bit off. So we'll simply click and drag, and then roll that window back down. Make sure that it says D4 to O4, and that's all there is to it. Because we already had our destination cell, which is cell Q4 selected, we don't need to fill in the location range. We can simply click OK. Because I know this can be just a little bit difficult to see depending on how you're viewing it, we're going to go ahead and zoom in a little. And now we can see the sparkline a little bit easier. Sparklines, just like text values and numeric values, can be filled. So we can apply the sparkline to all of our line items by simply moving to the bottom right corner of the cell, getting the little black plus sign, and dragging down. We also can modify how sparklines appear by adjusting the width of the column. Notice if we make the Q column very narrow, they get kind of squished together. We can still see kind of the basics of the chart, but it's a little more difficult. On the other hand, spreading it out can sometimes give us too much room. So find a happy medium on how you want to display your sparkline. The sparklines are not intended to give us very detailed information. They're intended and designed to give us an overview. In this case, it's exactly what we want. We can see, for example, that in row 10, which is our internet expense, we have a completely flat chart. That's because every single office, every single month, pays exactly the same amount for their internet service. So this is what we'd expect. On the other hand, if we're trying to get an overview of expenses, we could take a look at the very last line item, which is for catering expenses. Now, we obviously can't see specifically which values these are, but what we can see is that there are obviously 3 months in the year where our catering costs are significantly higher than other months. We may know that that's because most of our offices tend to do some type of activity in July for the summer, and then, of course, a couple of activities for the holiday season. Once again, the purpose of this is not to give us details, but to let us compare easily the values over time and to analyze trends in our spending. Many of the other cells do the same. Most of them, again, make sense. If something doesn't make a lot of sense, for example, why the cost for rent is high on both ends of the spectrum, the first quarter and the last quarter, but not in the middle, then we might need to do a little bit more research into the specific spreadsheets that are based off of these summaries. Sparklines certainly can be useful, but as we said, they don't give details. If we want details, that's when we go to one of the old standbys and what Excel is probably most known for, and that is a good old chart. We're going to create a chart, though, not the hard way, but the easy way. Dare I even say the magical way. Why do I say it that way? Because we actually can do an entire series, and have done an entire series, just on charts. There's a lot of details there. But what I know is that most people can really create what they need with just a couple of the features, and I can do that with one magic key. Before we get to the magic key, we need to select some data. So let's start by selecting the data that we want, which again is not going to include column P. We want to start at column O. And again, I know it's like working backwards, but one of the reasons I do this is to show people that Excel doesn't care what direction you do things. It understands whether you work left to right, right to left, top to bottom, or bottom to top. So we've selected the data that we want, including the labels. With that, we want to turn it into a chart. Ready for the magic key? Here it comes. Ta-da! Now, what is the magic key? The magic key is F11. It's been around for basically forever in Excel terms, but a lot of people don't know about it. Now, the ribbon has made making charts much faster than using the old wizard that had 3 or 4 steps, sometimes more. But this is the one that we need most often. It creates a default chart, which unless you've changed it, is a column chart. What I notice is that we do have one line of data that we really don't want, and that's the monthly totals. It's totaling up what we're already seeing in the chart. We can quickly modify what data is being used in the chart by using the Chart Tools Design contextual tab. Now, they kind of moved it around a little bit. In 2013, which is what I'm using, it's on the right-hand side. Regardless, just look for the option on the Chart Design tab that says Select Data. You could either type it in, you could select it again, but in this case, we simply want to remove one of our series, which is on the left-hand side. We remove the check mark from monthly total and don't have to do anything else fancy with it. We can simply click or tap OK. Our chart is already looking a lot better, but unfortunately, we have this one series that is just what I like to call disparate data. It strongly outweighs everything else. We know, of course, that this represents our rent, because our rent is by far the most expensive expense that we have every month. How can we deal with this? Well, a lot of people would simply remove it. But you know what? The rent is a big part of our expenses. And if we just take it out of the chart, then that's not really accurately describing our budget now, is it? There are many ways to handle this. I just want to show you one of them. And that is when you have very different values that need to be displayed in one chart, we can create something called a secondary axis. That will make this column, this bar, a lot smaller in relationship to the others. How do we do it? Well, we simply click to select the series that we're interested in. Then we can right-click and go to Format Data Series. Now, of course, we also could have done that by using a variety of ribbon options, but Format Data Series is the option we ultimately want to get to. There's a simple option now to simply put this on a secondary axis. With that, we can close out the pane and see that our chart is now much more usable. Of course, we can work with colors. We can work with different types of scales. We can work with even different types of combination charts where maybe our rent shows up as something different. But this really gets us what we were looking for, which is a simple overview of the budget as a whole. It shows the value for all of the skinny columns along the left, and those expenses are obviously $4,000 or less. If we look at the right-hand side of our chart, this is where we see the total costs for the rent or lease that we have between all of our properties. And unfortunately, I guess, those numbers are significantly higher, but we've been able to represent them all visually on a single chart instead of multiple charts. Budgets can be very complex. Likewise, the things that we can do with them using all of Excel's features are also very complex. What we want to strive for, though, is something that is flexible, that is also easily understood, and that will allow all of the users or viewers of this worksheet to be able to see the information they need in the way that they need to see it. Whether it be by creating charts and sparklines, or summarizing data using three-dimensional formulas, consolidation, or subtotals, or even allowing people to go back to the source data, which is in each of our individual worksheets by location, and be able to see that information in detail. We know that we now have flexible, meaningful budgets that are useful to everyone in our business. That is an important part of making good business and management decisions. That's what budgets are about, helping you create realistic, attainable goals and monitor progress in meeting them. It's not always easy to do, but budgets need to be the basis for working with expenses within your business in order to ensure success. In the world of finance, there are many ways to provide money and define the terms for its repayment. Many of us are familiar with something known as a regular amortized loan. An example of this would be a mortgage, where the payment remains stable over some period of time. The first payments go almost completely towards interest. Very little is going to pay down the principal. Near the end of the loan, the opposite is true, where a majority of the payment goes towards principal and interest is minimal. This is different than something called a term loan. With term loans, each payment we make is comprised of a fixed amount that goes towards the principal. It's the amount paid on interest that changes, as the interest is calculated on the remaining balance at the time of each payment. This means as the loan balance consistently decreases, the amount due for interest with each payment also is reduced, so the payment itself is reduced over time. Excel contains a number of financial functions to help in calculating everything from payments to interest and even the value of investments over time. If we need to do some very creative financing, then we may have to kind of piece together our own calculations to do so. But Excel's financial functions are very powerful and really do cover the gamut. Our company is interested in purchasing a new vehicle. We're thinking of purchasing a service van and want to look at different options related to a couple of finance offers that we have available to us. The monthly payment is a primary concern, but we also know that the total cost of the loan over time is also something that should be considered. So we've created a workbook called Loans in order to help us with that. The file can be found in your Chapter 3 Working Files folder. It contains the label and basic pieces of information that we've been offered for our financing options. We'll get started with one of the first questions, which almost always is, how much is this loan going to cost us per month? This utilizes one of Excel's most common and popular and also basic financial functions, the payment function. We start with the equal sign, followed by PMT. Once we get this far, we get the little tooltip below our active cell that shows us what the arguments are going to be. The payment function has a total of 5 possible arguments, but the last 2 are optional. The 3 that are required include the rate, which is the interest rate, NPER, which stands for number of periods, or how many payments are we going to make, and PV, that stands for present value. In other words, how much money are we borrowing? We'll go ahead and get started by using the options for option A. We'll get started with the rate, which is 3.8% and visible in cell B7. But I need to caution you, one of the challenges that people face with financial functions is making sure that everything in the function is in the same terms. In other words, we're trying to calculate a monthly payment, but we've currently selected an annual interest rate. Trust me, you do not want to pay 3.8% per month on your loan. So I'd strongly recommend that we divide this by 12 to actually calculate the monthly interest rate. The next argument is the number of periods. Now, both of our options are for 5-year terms, so this value can be found in B3. Since we're going to be copying this formula over to the second column to find out what option B will cost us, we need to make sure that this particular argument is set as an absolute value. That means instead of having it adjust from B3 when we copy it to the right to C3, we always want it to refer to cell B3. We could type the dollar signs manually, $B, $3, but I prefer the function key F4, which adds both of those dollar signs for me. Kind of the opposite is true of our loan period than that which was true with our interest rate. We needed to divide the interest rate by 12, but we need to multiply the loan period by 12, because the term is 5 years, not 5 payments. Our third argument is the present value of the loan. Once again, I'll caution you, this is not the purchase price of the vehicle. We're not borrowing that much money. For each of our options, we will be making some type of down payment. We can do one of 2 things. We could take the purchase price and subtract the down payment, or we could simply select the cell that we already have in row 6, which has already figured the actual loan amount. I think we'll go ahead and do this the easy way, and we'll click to select B6. There is no future value of this loan. In other words, there's no balloon payment at the end, and we're not too worried about whether the interest is coming at the beginning or end. We know that by default, a lot of loans are at the end. So we'll leave off the last 2 arguments, type the closing parenthesis, and press Enter or Tab. This tells us that the monthly payment for this term on this loan would be $861.34. You probably noticed the result of loan calculations always comes out as a negative value. I know this may seem backwards, but remember, in accounting, this is a payment or a debit, something that we will need to pay, and not a positive amount, which we would refer to normally as some type of income. If this bothers you, you can simply add a negative sign or dash at the beginning of the function, so Excel will multiply it by -1. If you can remember all the way back to 3rd or 4th grade, we learned that any time we multiply something by -1, it basically reverses its value. This would be especially important if you're going to link this value to a budget, and your budget includes positive entries for the amounts you're going to pay for individual items. Now, with that bit of explanation done, let's go ahead and copy our calculation over to the right. With that little bit of magic, we get to see that the difference in the payments between option A and option B is $35.65 a month. I don't know, that may or may not be a lot of money, it just is what it is. What we would have to assess is whether it's worth $35 a month in order to save $1,500 that are required for the extra down payment to get the slightly lower interest rate. This, however, is only part of the picture, and I wish everybody would understand that just knowing what the payments are going to be is not quite the whole picture. We also need to know what the total cost of the loan will be. That's a calculation that we'll carry out in cell B11. Since this is an amortized loan, we know that we're going to be paying interest over the entire term of the loan. We want to know what the total of all that interest is going to be. To do so, we're going to use a function called cumulative interest payment. Once we get CUMI/PMT typed in, Excel tells us that this is very similar to the regular payment function. It requires rate, the number of periods, and the present value. What it has in addition, though, is the start period and the end period. These arguments are going to be numeric values that actually stand for the number of the payments for which you want to see the interest. We want to see interest for the entire loan. So our start period will be 1 and our end period will be 60. If we wanted to only see interest for a certain year, for example, or maybe a quarter of the loan, then we could put in the appropriate start and end numbers as those arguments. Since I've already talked to you about how to enter these, I'll go ahead and just be quiet for a moment and you can watch me type. Now remember, the start period is 1 and the end period for our loan is 60. This time, we'll go ahead and put a 0 in to say that these payments are made at the end of the period. Notice, however, that Excel does give us a little help so we can make sure that we choose the right one and even know what the options for arguments are. We'll go ahead and press Enter. And there we go. It may not be a number that we want to see, but $4,680.46 is how much interest we will pay with option A. If we fill over to the right-hand side, we will see that the interest, of course, is slightly lower on the right-hand side. It's a difference of $639.16 over the term of the loan. These calculations provide the information we will need in order to determine which finance option we want to utilize. What they can't help us do is determine whether it's more important to lower the monthly payment and actually lower the overall cost of the loan, or to keep an extra $1,500 in our bank account at the moment. That's why which options are the best choices for you and your company is going to be a subjective decision. In this video, we explored how to calculate what the payment will be on a loan, given certain loan conditions. We also explored how to calculate the total interest paid over time, which helps us understand the total cost of the loan. In part 2 of this topic, we'll explore how to access templates in order to create complete amortization schedules, as well as how to share workbooks so that multiple people can view the workbook and we can track changes that may be made by them. In part 1 of this topic, we used financial functions to calculate the payment due on a loan. We also calculated the total cost of the loan as far as interest was concerned over time. In this video, we want to explore how we can create an amortization schedule to show how our payments are affecting the balance, as well as what's being applied to principal and what to interest for each payment. We also want to share our workbook so that multiple people can view it at the same time, and if someone makes changes, those changes will be tracked. In advanced Excel classes, or the ones specifically for finance, I usually force my students to completely create an amortization schedule by hand, because it utilizes so many critical skills that they need to review. We've already reviewed some of these skills, including the use of absolute referencing. So what I'd like to do is remind you that there are many very useful and time-saving templates that can be found at office.com. And you know what? It's okay to use them. It's all about saving time if it gives you what you need. So we'll go ahead and move up to the Backstage by clicking on the File tab and selecting the new category. We're going to go ahead and do a search for loan amortization. There are a ton of templates that can be used for this. We're simply going to choose the first one, which is a basic amortization schedule. We'll click on it once, and then click or tap Create, and wait for it to do its thing. This is a pretty in-depth template, so it may take a second or two depending on your internet connection. Here it is, and it may not be so impressive at first, but wait till you see what it does with just a few entries. We're going to put in the values for our loan. We've decided that we're probably going to go with option B, which means our loan amount is $45,500. Our annual interest rate is 3.4%, which we could type in as 3.4 followed by the percent sign, or using the decimal value of 0.034. The loan period in years is 5. And the number of payments we're going to make is just a simple monthly payment, which would be 12. Lastly, we'll put in the start date of the loan, and we'll just pick June 1st of 2014 as a good start date. Now watch this. With one press of the Enter key, bam, everything is done for us. We didn't have to divide and multiply by 12, figure out any arguments or anything. It's just all here. On the right-hand side, it talks about our scheduled payments, how many there are, and how much they'll be. Down below is the amortization schedule that we were looking for. This includes which payment we're making, the date the payment is due on, the beginning balance, the scheduled payment, any extra payments if we're going to make any, the total payment, and how much goes to principal, interest, as well as the ending balance and the cumulative interest. I don't know about you, but to me that's an awful lot of really good information by simply going and pulling something off of the website. Don't forget, I'm always for knowing how to do things by ourselves in Excel, but I'm also about being efficient, and for things like amortization schedules, using a template is by far the fastest, easiest way to get the answers we need. The only issue we want to resolve is the fact that this was created as a new workbook, and we actually want to see it along with our other worksheet in the old workbook. No worries though, we can actually do this with just a couple of clicks. If we move down to the Worksheet tab at the bottom of the worksheet window and give it a right click, we can choose Move or Copy. We don't want to keep it in the current workbook. We want to move it to the one that we have open, which is called loans.xlsx. We'll move it to the end, and we'll click or tap OK. That immediately closes down that old file because that's the only worksheet that was in it, and the file had not been saved yet. And you can see that we now have both of our worksheets, the amortization schedule, as well as our vehicle purchase worksheet together in one place. So now we have all the heavy lifting done as it relates to finding out what we want to know in order to make a good business decision for the loan. What we need to do now is make sure that we can share this information and that the multiple people who want to look at this aren't going to get stymied by trying to open the file and having Excel say, sorry, already opened and locked by somebody else. Well, this is actually a fairly easy process that's often overlooked by a lot of Excel users. Excel has an option called Share Workbook. It can be found under the Review tab. If we click or tap Share Workbook, it opens a simple window with a couple of different tabs. First, we have to say that it is okay to allow changes by more than one person at the same time. If multiple people already had it open, they would be listed in the bottom of the window. From the Advanced tab, what we can also do is decide if we want to keep track of changes, if or so, how long, and what to do if two people try to make changes at the same time. We're going to update changes every time the file is saved, and we're going to say that if there are conflicts, go ahead and ask which one should be saved. We'll click or tap OK. The workbook has to be saved, so we'll say OK, and that's it. We don't really see anything different on screen, but it's now possible for multiple people to access the workbook and to edit it at the same time, which can be really nice in a business environment, especially when everybody's trying to do something at the end of the last business day of the month. We should feel good about what we've produced. Good information is what is required to make good decisions. How many times have you heard someone defend their decisions because they say they didn't know something or that it was inaccurate? We do not want to be one of those people. When it comes to working with money, including the occasional need to take out a loan, the best thing we can do is gather the facts, including any options we may have, and carefully analyze all aspects of them. This goes beyond just what the payments will be and extends to the actual real, total cost of the loan over time, as well as the effects it may have on our cash reserves, like with various down payments. We often need to share information like this with others, so we can have the input in making the best decisions possible. Fortunately, Excel is packed with functions, templates, and tools to help us plan for and track our finances, including business loans. Have you considered exactly why an Excel file is called a workbook and what we work within that is called a worksheet? Well, it's because Excel's roots are back in the real days of accounting when we actually used workbooks and sheets within those workbooks to manually enter data. Now, I'm not trying to say that there's anything wrong with doing this electronically, just trying to give you a little history lesson. What I know is that registers like this are really not very exciting, and that's okay. I'm not trying to get you excited about registers themselves. In fact, in these days of electronic banking, I'm not sure how many people may even use a paper-based check register or remember what they are. So I guess I may need to update my analogy, but still, that's where the terminology comes from in Excel. What I also know is that whether you are a complete financial novice or a financial professional, it's very difficult to get excited about account registers. I'm not even going to try to get you excited about them, But I do want to get you excited about an important feature that can be applied to them, and that is the ability to use Excel's data validation functions to ensure accurate quality values are entered. Quality data not only refers to making sure that it is accurate, which can be assessed in many ways, but also ensuring that as we monitor the data, that our attention is brought to specific values if or when it's appropriate. This is also accomplished through data validation. We currently have the Account Registers file open from the Chapter 3 Working Files folder. It's an account register for a business credit card. It includes all the information you'd expect, including date, payee, a description, an accounting category, the amount of the transaction, and a running totals balance in the F column. It has been set up as a table, so it's much easier to read with the alternating shading of rows. It's also easy to sort and filter using the in-column drop-downs at the top of each column. All of these tools allow for easier manipulation of the register, but they have nothing to do with accurate data. We want to ensure that the values that are entered here are of good quality. We'll start by adding some data validation to the category column. Before we get there, though, let's take a look at the second worksheet in this file. It's actually called Expense Categories. It's a very simple list of just that, but these are the categories that our bookkeepers and accountants want us to use so that they can easily apply them to the budgets and maybe all of the other financial statements that they need to produce. Anytime people are allowed to type freeform, we can almost guarantee that the values will not be consistent. It's just human nature. It's not that they're trying to do anything wrong. From a user standpoint, it can also be more difficult if the users don't know specifically what values are preferred. Someone who does not participate in accounting and bookkeeping as part of their regular job might simply call something desk stuff instead of the more formal category known as office supplies. We can address both of these problems by requiring entries into the field in the register to match this list of predefined values. While formats control how data appears, data validation is what controls what type of content, the values that can actually be entered. So let's get back to our credit card register, and let's select all of column D. This is the column to which we want to apply the data validation. Data validation refers to data, and therefore it is found on the Data tab of the ribbon. It's found in the Data Tools group, and it should have a drop-down from which we can choose data validation one more time. This brings up a window in which we can create the validation rule. By default, every cell in every worksheet has data validation. The rule is just set to accept any value. We want to change that. Notice from the drop-down that there are many different choices, and we want to be as specific as possible. Do we want any number or just whole numbers? Do we want dates or do we want times? We're actually going to choose the list option. We have some checkboxes on the right-hand side that allow us to ignore blank cells and another checkbox for in-cell drop-downs. I like the in-cell drop-down because people know how to use those these days, and they can simply select from the list without having to type. Whether you're going to allow blank values or not is a personal decision. In an account register, somebody entering a value may not know what category to apply, so we may not want to force them to put in an entry. For this particular argument, we simply need to define the source. We'll roll up the window, move down, and select our Expense Categories worksheet, and simply click and drag to select the entire list. At this point, we can unroll the window, and we're pretty much done. But there are two more tabs that are available. The second one is called an input message. This would allow a little pop-up message to appear when somebody clicks on any one of the cells in the D column. This can be helpful because it provides useful information. But what I've found is that very quickly it becomes annoying because anytime one of those cells is selected, the message pops up and it can't be closed unless you click off of the cell. So we're going to say, do not use this. The next tab is important because this is where we determine exactly what we're going to do if somebody does not use one of the entries on our list. The options are defined by the style. Stop would force a person to stop and select something from the list, or they would not be able to continue working. A warning kind of gives a choice. It says, I think you may want to review that, but if you want to go ahead, I'll let you do that too. Information is just that. A dialog box will pop open with our message. All they need to do is click OK. We're going to choose the middle option. We then need to create our message. Maybe the title would be Selected Category. What do we want to say about that? Well, maybe the error message says, please choose a predefined category from the list. If I wanted to spend a little more typing, and maybe in the real world, I would add something else like, these are acceptable accounting categories, or a little bit more explanation. But you get the idea. That's all we have to do. Now we can click OK. So what did we actually just accomplish? Well, if we click on one of these different cells, we can see that there's a drop-down. We can choose from the list, which, as we said, makes it very easy for people to select something that is correct without having to type. But we can also type into the cell. Obviously, if we choose something from the list, there will be no violation, and when they move off of the cell, everything will be fine. But if they type something and then try to move off of the cell, this is when they get to see our error message. Selected category, please choose a predefined category from the list. Because we did not choose stop and we did not choose information, they actually have an option here. If they choose to continue, then it will deselect the cell and move to the cell indicated. In this case, I pressed enter so it would move down. If I say no, then it will actually take me back to the cell and let me make an edit. We also can cancel and get help. I'm going to say that's exactly what I wanted to put and I want to keep it. So I'll click yes, and you can see that it did not prevent me from entering this. It just notified me that it wasn't a good choice. That brings up the second part of validation. If we are going to allow entries that are not on our list by choosing anything other than the stop category, then at some point in time, as maybe a manager, we want to go in and see if there's anything that violates the rule. If we move back to the Data tab of the ribbon and go back to Data Validation, but this time choose Circle Invalid Data, this will actually highlight anything that does not meet the rules.